Ricardo Mendez sat perfectly still as Mariana's pen scratched across the divorce papers. Only his eyes betrayed any emotion, not the devastation she expected, but something else, something patient. "You're making this easier than I thought," she said, sliding the documents toward him. "Roberto will be pleased." The name of her boss, her lover, hung in the air between them. Ricardo simply nodded, his signature flowing across the page with surprising steadiness. What Mariana couldn't see was the lottery ticket in his wallet. 12 million reais. A fortune discovered mere hours before she'd announced her infidelity and demanded their marriage end. His lawyer had been clear. In Brazilian law, she could claim half if he revealed it now. So Ricardo signed his name, accepted her betrayal, and kept his secret. "Is that all?" he asked quietly. It wasn't, not by 12 million reasons, but that knowledge was his alone. Ricardo Mendez rubbed his tired eyes as he compared the numbers on his lottery ticket to those on the computer screen. Friday afternoon at the accounting firm always dragged, but this weekly ritual provided a small break from spreadsheets and tax forms. He'd been playing the same numbers for years: his father's birthday, his childhood home address, and the day he graduated university. "Still chasing that dream, Ricardo?" Paulo from the next cubicle leaned over with a good-natured smile. "One of these days, huh?" Ricardo nodded absently. "Someone has to win. Might as well be." His voice died mid-sentence. The numbers on the screen matched his ticket. All of them. "Might as well be what?" Paulo asked, returning to his work. Ricardo's mouth went dry. He double-checked, triple-checked. There was no mistake. 12 million reais. His hands trembled slightly as he folded the ticket and slipped it into his wallet. "Nothing," he managed, voice steadier than his heartbeat. "Just talking to myself." He turned back to his computer, but the spreadsheet numbers blurred before him. 12 million reais, freedom, the end of mortgage payments on a house that had grown too quiet since Mariana's increasing late nights at work. Perhaps this was what they needed: a fresh start, travel, the children they'd been putting off until they were more financially stable. "You okay?" Paulo asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Ricardo composed his face into the calm mask he'd perfected during 15 years of client meetings. "Just realized I need to get home early tonight. Mariana said she had something important to discuss." As he packed his briefcase, Ricardo felt the weight of the ticket in his wallet. Heavier than paper had any right to be. He would surprise her tonight, maybe with champagne, before sharing the news. This could change everything. Ricardo entered their apartment with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. He'd stopped to buy Mariana's favorite wine, rehearsing different ways to tell her about their new fortune. The half-packed suitcase on the bed stopped him cold. "You're home early," Mariana said, emerging from the closet with an armful of clothes. She was already dressed for an evening out, not in work attire. "What's this?" Ricardo gestured to the suitcase, wine bottle still dangling from his other hand. "That's what I wanted to discuss." She set the clothes down neatly, her movements precise and controlled. "I'm leaving you, Ricardo." The words hung in the air between them. Ricardo set the wine bottle on the dresser, suddenly aware of how ridiculous it looked. "Leaving me," he repeated. "For how long?" Mariana sighed, impatience flickering across her face. "Permanently. I want a divorce." "Why?" The question came automatically while his mind raced to process the collision of the day's events. "I've met someone else." She folded a blouse with mechanical precision. "Roberto, my boss." Ricardo felt a strange detachment, as if watching the scene from above. How long? Does it matter? 3 months? She wouldn't meet his eyes. We're in love. A bitter laugh escaped him before he could stop it. Love. After 15 years of marriage, you're throwing everything away for 3 months of… what? Office romance? It's not like that, she snapped, her composure cracking. Roberto sees me, values me. When was the last time you really looked at me, Ricardo? We've been going through the motions for years. Ricardo's hand moved unconsciously to his wallet. The lottery ticket seemed to burn against his leg. I've already spoken to a lawyer, she continued, pulling papers from her purse. I'm not asking for much, just my fair share of our assets. I know the apartment is mostly yours, but I'll need enough to start over. Just like that. 15 years reduced to asset division? Don't make this harder than it needs to be. She laid the divorce papers on the bed. I'll be staying at Roberto's tonight. You can review these, and we'll meet with the lawyers next week. After Mariana left, Ricardo sat in his study, the lottery ticket and divorce papers side by side on his desk. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same day, life offered him everything. It took away the person he thought he'd share it with. He stared at his reflection in the window, darkness having fallen outside. His father's voice echoed in his memory. In a crisis, the man who thinks clearly wins. Ricardo picked up his phone and searched Brazilian divorce law. As he suspected, assets acquired during marriage were generally split equally, regardless of who earned them. If he revealed the lottery win now, Mariana would be entitled to half 6 million reais for 3 months with her boss. The thought burned in his stomach. He could fight it, make the divorce messy and public, expose her affair to their friends, her family. The temptation was strong, but what would that accomplish beyond temporary satisfaction? Ricardo carefully folded the lottery ticket and placed it in his home safe behind a book on tax law. Then he returned to the divorce papers, reading every line with the focus he gave his most important contracts. Tomorrow he would call his own lawyer, not to fight the divorce, but to protect what was his. He smiled faintly at his reflection. Mariana thought she held all the cards, but the game had only just begun. The law office of Suarez Associates occupied the 23rd floor of a glass tower in São Paulo's financial district. Ricardo sat across from Mariana at a polished conference table, their respective lawyers flanking them like seconds in a duel. Between them lay the dismantling of 15 years, reduced to clauses and signatures. As you can see, Mr. Mendes, Mariana's lawyer, a sharp-featured woman named Dr. Carvalho, tapped a manicured nail against the document. We've kept the terms straightforward. Mrs. Mendes waives any claim to your family property in Minas Gerais, and you'll retain the apartment with a compensatory payment of 220,000 reais. Ricardo nodded, his face betraying nothing as he scanned the pages. His own lawyer, Dr. Tavares, a gray-haired man with reading glasses perched on his nose, highlighted various sections with practiced efficiency. The division of retirement accounts appears equitable, Dr. Tavares noted, and the personal property split as discussed. Ricardo glanced at Mariana, who was checking her phone beneath the table. She wore the same perfume she'd worn when they first met. Now he wondered if it was for Roberto's benefit. Any questions before we proceed? Dr. Carvalho asked, her gaze analytical, searching for hesitation. No, Ricardo said, his voice calm. The terms are clear. Mariana looked up from her phone, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. She'd expected argument, resistance, anything but this placid acceptance. Well, that's refreshingly mature, she said with a brittle smile. I thought this might be more difficult. Ricardo met her eyes. What purpose would that serve? The lawyers exchanged glances. They'd seen enough divorces to recognize when one was proceeding too smoothly. Dr. Tavares leaned toward Ricardo. Are you certain you're comfortable with these terms? He asked quietly. We could negotiate several points. I'm certain. Ricardo accepted the pen, Doctor. Tavares offered. As he signed each page, he noticed his wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. He'd need to remove it soon. Mariana took her turn signing, her signature flowing with practiced ease. When she finished, she slid the ring from her finger and placed it on the document. I won't be needing this anymore, she said, her tone casual, as if discarding an outdated accessory. Ricardo pocketed his own ring without comment, aware of the weight of the lottery ticket in his wallet, far heavier than gold. Let me make sure I understand correctly, Carlos Neves said, leaning forward across his desk in the small financial consulting office 3 neighborhoods away from Ricardo's usual haunts. You've won the lottery, 12 million reais, but you're in the middle of divorce proceedings, and your wife doesn't know about it? Ricardo nodded. The timing is unfortunate. Carlos, a stocky man in his 50s with shrewd eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, whistled softly. And you're certain the ticket was purchased after separation was established? Positive. I bought it Friday afternoon. She asked for divorce that evening. Brazilian law is clear. Assets acquired during marriage are subject to equal division. But once separation is established, new acquisitions remain individual property. Carlos tapped his pen against the desk calendar. The question becomes, can you collect and secure these funds before the divorce is finalized? That's why I'm here. Ricardo leaned forward. I need options. Carlos nodded, understanding the gravity. How long until the divorce is final? 30 days minimum with our current agreement. Tight, but workable. Carlos pulled a legal pad forward. First, you need to claim the prize immediately, but discreetly. Lottery winners' names are public record, but you'd be surprised how few people actually check those lists. And the money itself? That's trickier. Domestic transfers of this size raise flags. You'll need offshore options. Carlos wrote rapidly. I have contacts in Portugal. Their banking laws are compatible with Brazil, but offer certain flexibilities for Brazilian nationals considering relocation. Ricardo considered this. Portugal? Clean slate, good infrastructure, no language barrier. Carlos glanced at his watch. We need to move quickly. The first transfer should be modest, under reporting thresholds, then structured movements to appear as investment capital. Is it legal? Ricardo asked, the question heavy with implication. Carlos met his gaze directly. It's legal to protect your assets in advance of potential claims. It's not legal to hide existing marital assets. The timing makes this a gray area, but one that favors you given the sequence of events. Ricardo nodded slowly. I need this done right. Then we start tonight. I'll need you to sign these authorizations. Carlos slid several forms across the desk. And Ricardo, until this is complete, maintain absolute normalcy. Any deviation in routine could raise suspicions. Ricardo was boxing old books when Mariana used her key to enter the apartment a week later. She still moved through the space with the familiarity of ownership, though most of her possessions were gone. I forgot some financial documents, she said by way of greeting. They should be in the study. Ricardo continued packing. Help yourself. She paused, studying him with narrowed eyes. You seem different. Different how? He kept his tone neutral, though his pulse quickened. I'm not sure. She leaned against the doorframe. At the lawyer's office, I expected anger, bargaining, something. But you've been so accommodating. It's not like you. Ricardo shelved another book. What would you prefer? Arguments? Recriminations? At least it would make sense. She crossed her arms. 15 years together, and you're just letting go without a fight. A small, dangerous smile touched Ricardo's lips. Maybe I've accepted that some things aren't worth fighting for. Her expression hardened. Is there something I should know about, Ricardo? Some reason you're so eager to end this? You're the one who packed first, he reminded her quietly. You're the one who found someone else. And yet, you're the one who seems relieved. She stepped closer, eyes searching his face. Roberto thinks you might be hiding something. Assets, maybe. The irony almost made Ricardo laugh. Does he now? Interesting what concerns your boss when he's sleeping with his employee's wife. Color rose in Mariana's cheeks. I'll need those financial statements, all of them. They'll be provided through proper legal channels, Ricardo replied, turning back to his books. Is there anything else? She hesitated at the door. This isn't over, Ricardo. If you're concealing anything, I'll find out. After she left, Ricardo called Carlos. They would need to accelerate their timeline. Ricardo sat in a private consultation room at Banco Nacional, his hands steady despite the stakes. Across the desk, Miss Almeida, a senior banking officer with gold-rimmed glasses and perfect posture, reviewed his documentation. Congratulations on your lottery win, Mr. Mendez, she said, her voice professionally modulated. 12 million reais is quite significant. We'll need to process several forms for compliance purposes. Ricardo nodded. I understand. Carlos Neves explained the procedures. Miss Almeida tapped her keyboard. We have the Lottery Commission's verification. The funds will be available in your account today, but there are transaction limits to consider. I'd like to establish international transfer capabilities, Ricardo said. I'm considering investment opportunities abroad. Her fingers paused briefly. I see. There are additional documentation requirements for international transfers, especially of this magnitude. I'm prepared for that. A younger bank officer entered with a stack of forms. Ricardo watched as numbers representing his fortune appeared on the screen. Digital symbols of freedom if he succeeded, or loss if he failed. Our system flags transfers over 500,000 reais for additional review, Ms. Almeida explained. Each transfer requires separate authorization and processing time of 3-5 business days. Ricardo calculated quickly. At that rate, moving the full amount would take weeks, precious time he didn't have. Are there alternatives for established clients? He asked. There's our global investment program, she offered. It allows higher thresholds for qualified investors. However, it requires portfolio review and investment intent documentation. Ricardo maintained his composure while his mind raced. I'd like to apply for that program immediately. For the next 2 hours, Ricardo signed documents, provided identification, and answered questions about his investment intentions. Each signature brought him closer to securing his future, yet also increased the risk of discovery. The first transfer of 800,000 reais to the Portuguese bank is authorized, Miss Almeida finally said. The remaining transfers will require additional approvals, but we've established the pathway. As Ricardo left the bank, he felt both relief and apprehension. The plan was in motion, but far from complete. He checked his watch. Carlos would be waiting for an update. Tax identification numbers, proof of address, source of funds documentation. The Portuguese banking system is thorough, Carlos said, spreading papers across his desk that evening. "And we're hitting unexpected hurdles." Ricardo leaned forward. "What kind of hurdles?" "Their central bank has new regulations for non-resident accounts. You need a fiscal representative in Portugal, and the recent anti-money laundering directives require enhanced due diligence for transfers over 500,000 euros. Ricardo's jaw tightened. "Can we overcome this?" "Yes, but it complicates our timeline." Carlos checked his watch. It was nearly midnight. "The divorce will be final in what, 3 weeks?" 22 days, Ricardo corrected. Carlos pulled out a calendar, marking dates with a red pen. "We need to accelerate. First, we establish your fiscal representation in Lisbon. I have a colleague there who can assist. Then we structure the transfers as business investment capital rather than personal funds." "Is that legal?" "With the right corporate structure, yes. We'll establish a legitimate investment vehicle." Carlos's pen moved across the calendar. "The critical period is the next 10 days. If Mariana's lawyers file any additional discovery requests during this window, they could potentially freeze assets pending investigation." Ricardo hadn't considered this possibility. "What are the chances of that happening?" "Low, unless they have specific suspicions." Carlos studied Ricardo's face. "Has she indicated any concerns?" Ricardo recalled Mariana's probing questions. "She's suspicious, but doesn't know what she's looking for." "Then we proceed carefully. Tomorrow, you'll need to visit the Portuguese consulate for documentation. I'll prepare a business plan for the investment vehicle." Carlos handed him several forms. "These need notarized signatures by morning." Ricardo took the papers, feeling the weight of the rapidly closing window. "I'll make it happen." "Ricardo, it's been ages!" Teresa exclaimed as he joined her at the cafe table. Teresa had worked with Mariana years ago before moving to another company. They'd maintained a friendly relationship, occasionally meeting for coffee. "Good to see you, Teresa. How's life at Globex treating you?" "Can't complain. The corporate world spins on." She stirred her coffee. "I was surprised to hear about you and Mariana. You seemed so solid." Ricardo managed a measured smile. "Life is full of surprises." "True enough. I just never thought Roberto would—" She stopped abruptly, realizing her misstep. "Roberto would what?" Ricardo asked, suddenly alert. Teresa shifted uncomfortably. "Nothing. Just office politics." "Teresa," Ricardo said gently, "whatever it is, I'd rather know than not." She sighed. "It's just—" Roberto's had his eye on Mariana for years. Even at that company retreat last year, people noticed how they disappeared for hours during the activities. We all thought it was just mentorship, but now— Ricardo maintained his composed expression while his mind recalculated. "Last year's retreat was 14 months ago, not 3 months as Mariana had claimed." "I shouldn't have said anything," Teresa continued, misreading his silence. "Maybe I misinterpreted." "No, I appreciate your honesty." Ricardo kept his voice even. "Did Mariana ever mention anything about being unhappy in our marriage back then?" "Actually, she talked about you all the time, how you were planning to renovate your apartment, maybe start a family soon." Teresa looked genuinely pained. "That's what makes this so shocking." The betrayal cut deeper than Ricardo had anticipated. While he'd been planning their future, Mariana had already been building an exit strategy. As they finished their coffee, Ricardo noticed a text notification on his phone. It was from Carlos. "Urgent situation. Meet immediately. Possible surveillance on your accounts." Ricardo excused himself calmly, but inside, a cold determination solidified. The stakes had just gotten higher, and so had his resolve. "This is completely unacceptable," Mariana declared, slapping a folder onto the conference table. The initial asset division overlooked significant resources. Ricardo maintained his composed expression as Dr. Tavares examined the new documents. They were back in the same sterile conference room at Suarez Associates, but the atmosphere had shifted from procedural to combative. "My client," Dr. Carvalho began, her voice crisp with authority, "has discovered Mr. Mendez has not disclosed his complete FGTS account balance. We're also requesting access to his private pension fund records." Ricardo glanced at his lawyer, who adjusted his reading glasses with practiced calm. "The FGTS balance was included in the initial disclosure," Dr. Tavares responded. "Page 17, item 4. "The balance reported is from 3 months ago," Dr. Carvalho countered. "We require current statements, including any recent withdrawals." Mariana leaned forward. "I know how you operate, Ricardo. You're always tucking away little reserves. 15 years of marriage taught me that much." The irony wasn't lost on Ricardo. Her obsession with his modest retirement fund while millions were being transferred offshore. But her instincts weren't entirely wrong. "Mrs. Mendez," Dr. Tavares interjected, "the original agreement you signed specified the asset valuation date. Introducing new demands now delays the process for everyone." "I don't care about delays," Mariana said, her eyes fixed on Ricardo. "I care about getting what's rightfully mine." Ricardo finally spoke. "The FGTS account hasn't changed significantly. I can provide updated statements." "And why should we believe that?" Mariana challenged. "Because unlike some people at this table, I honor my commitments," Ricardo replied evenly. Dr. Carvalho raised a hand. "We're also requesting a temporary freeze on all Mr. Mendez accounts pending full discovery." Ricardo felt a cold spike of alarm, but kept his expression neutral. A freeze now would be catastrophic. Dr. Tavares shook his head. "That's excessive and unwarranted. My client has complied with all disclosure requirements." "Then he shouldn't object to verification," Mariana said with a tight smile. "We'll provide updated statements," Ricardo offered, calculating rapidly. "But a freeze is unnecessarily punitive and would impact my ability to meet current obligations." "We can compromise," Dr. Tavares suggested. "Updated statements within 48 hours. No freeze necessary." The negotiation continued for another 30 minutes, eventually settling on a 3-day deadline for additional documentation. As they gathered their papers, Ricardo knew he was racing against time. The transfers had to accelerate. Ricardo sat in a corner booth at Café Paulista, ostensibly reviewing work documents. In reality, his position offered a clear view of the restaurant's patio where Roberto and a junior executive from his company were engaged in an intimate lunch. He hadn't planned this reconnaissance. A former colleague had mentioned seeing Roberto here regularly. The opportunity to observe undetected was too valuable to ignore. Paulo, Ricardo's co-worker, slid into the booth with 2 coffees. "That's them? Your wife's situation?" Ricardo nodded slightly, accepting the coffee. "That's Roberto. The woman isn't Mariana." Paulo whistled softly. "Classic pattern. Climb the ladder, discard the previous rung." Roberto leaned in close to the young woman, his hand lingering on hers. The same attentive posture Ricardo had observed at company events with Mariana. "Has Mariana mentioned anything about Roberto lately?" Ricardo asked casually. Paulo hesitated. "You sure you want to hear this? I need to know what I'm dealing with." "Word around the office is he's been cooling toward her. And Elena from HR overheard them arguing last week. Apparently, now that the divorce is proceeding, he's having second thoughts about their future together. Ricardo absorbed this without visible reaction, though a grim satisfaction settled in his chest. "There's more," Paolo added. "She's been telling people she expects a director position once everything settles, something Roberto supposedly promised her." "And is that likely?" Paolo snorted. "The board just approved Roberto's nephew for the next directorship. Mariana doesn't know yet." As if on cue, Mariana herself appeared at the restaurant entrance, her expression shifting from anticipation to confusion as she spotted Roberto with his companion. She stood frozen for a moment before retreating, unnoticed by her lover. "That's rough," Paolo murmured. Ricardo watched her departing figure. "Yes," he said quietly, "it is." The Sao Paulo Botanical Garden offered rare solitude in the bustling city. Ricardo sat on a bench beside a small reflecting pool, watching koi fish create ripples across the otherwise still surface. Sunset painted the water copper and gold, mirroring his increasingly complex thoughts. Was he acting from justice or vengeance? The question had been haunting him for days. Legally, the lottery win occurring after Mariana asked for divorce made it his separate property. But if circumstances were reversed, if she had won and concealed it, wouldn't he consider it a moral violation? He picked up a fallen leaf, turning it between his fingers. His father had taught him that a man's character was defined by choices made when no one was watching. What kind of man was he becoming through all this? The fish circled, creating overlapping patterns in the water, like his own conflicting motivations, protection of what was rightfully his versus satisfaction in Mariana's coming downfall. "Am I becoming what I despise?" he whispered to the empty garden. It wasn't just about money anymore. Learning that the affair had begun over a year ago, seeing Mariana grasping for his modest retirement funds while she'd been betraying him, these revelations had hardened something in him. Yet the image of her standing alone outside the restaurant, watching her future crumble just as she'd crumbled his, brought no real satisfaction. Perhaps true justice wasn't about punishment, but about freedom. His freedom from a relationship built on deception. His phone vibrated. A message from Dr. Tavares. "Final divorce decree ready for signature tomorrow. Court date confirmed." Ricardo dropped the leaf into the pool, watching it float on the surface. Tomorrow he would legally be free of Mariana, though Carlos estimated they needed another week to complete the transfers. A choice lay before him: accelerate the final transfers and risk detection, or proceed carefully and risk losing half to a woman who had already taken enough. As darkness fell over the garden, Ricardo made his decision, not from vengeance, but from a deeper place, a determination that sometimes protecting oneself was the highest form of justice. Ricardo sat in his half-emptied home office, laptop open to a virtual meeting with Helena Ferreira, an expatriate consultant based in Lisbon. On his second monitor, a map of Portugal displayed neighborhoods she had recommended, while printouts of residency requirements covered his desk. "The D7 visa is your best option," Helena explained, her Portuguese accent lending authority to her words. "It's designed for non-EU citizens with passive income sources. With your financial profile, approval should be straightforward." Ricardo made notes. "What about banking requirements?" "Portugal has several banks catering to Brazilian nationals. Banco Atlântico has branches in both countries, simplifying transfers. Their New Horizons program provides concierge services for relocation." "And housing?" Ricardo asked, studying the map. "For someone seeking a fresh start, I recommend Cascais or Belém, close to Lisbon, but with their own character. Cascais offers coastal living. Belém has historical charm with modern amenities. Ricardo zoomed in on Cascais, the coastal views stirring something he hadn't felt in months, genuine anticipation. What's the rental market like? With your budget, you could secure a two-bedroom apartment with ocean views for around €1,500 monthly. Long-term rentals typically require 3 months' deposit. As Helena detailed the logistics of Portuguese daily life, from healthcare to transportation, Ricardo found himself mentally furnishing an apartment he hadn't yet seen, picturing morning walks along the Atlantic. Many Brazilians find Portugal feels both familiar and refreshingly different, Helena continued. Same language, different pace. It's an excellent place to restart. The word resonated. Not escape, but restart. How quickly could this happen? Ricardo asked. Once your documentation is submitted, 3 to 4 months is typical. However, she added with a knowing smile, those with established banking relationships can sometimes expedite matters. I've helped clients relocate in as little as 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Ricardo glanced at his calendar. The divorce would be final tomorrow, with most transfers already complete. I'd like to move forward immediately, he said, feeling a certainty that had been absent for too long. As the call ended, Ricardo opened a new document. Not a divorce filing or financial transfer form, but something more significant. A list titled New Life, Lisbon. The morning brought 2 envelopes, one from Dr. Tavares, containing the final divorce decree, the other from Carlos, with confirmation of the last major transfer to Portugal. Ricardo stood in his kitchen, both documents spread before him like twin proclamations of independence. Congratulations, Mr. Mendez, Carlos said over the speakerphone. The final transfer of 3.2 million reais has cleared. Your Portuguese account now holds approximately 11.4 million reais equivalent, with the remainder in the corporate investment structure we established. Ricardo studied the banking confirmation. Any issues with the transfer? None. The timing was perfect, just before the decree becomes legally registered. You're officially a wealthy single man, with assets secured beyond Brazilian jurisdiction. The timing felt symbolic, financial freedom arriving simultaneously with legal release from his marriage. And the documentation for Portugal, Ricardo asked, being processed expeditiously. Your investor status simplifies matters considerably. I've scheduled your meeting with the Portuguese consulate for Thursday. Ricardo picked up the divorce decree, the formal language declaring the dissolution of 15 years of his life in clinical terminology. He should have felt something more profound, grief perhaps, or anger. Instead, he experienced a lightness he barely recognized. Is there anything else needed from me? Ricardo asked, already thinking about what to pack, what to leave behind. Just your signature on the final paperwork at the consulate. Everything else is in motion. Carlos paused. Ricardo, if I may say, in 20 years of financial planning, I've rarely seen someone handle such a situation with your level of composure. Ricardo folded the divorce decree and placed it in his desk drawer, a chapter closed. Thank you, Carlos, for everything. After ending the call, Ricardo walked through his apartment, seeing it not as the home he was losing, but as the past he was choosing to leave. 15 years reduced to furniture and photographs he no longer wanted. Freedom, he realized, wasn't just in legal documents or bank accounts. It was in the decision to walk away clean. That's confirmed, Mr. Mendez. One way to Lisbon, departing next Tuesday at 10:15 p.m. The travel agent handed Ricardo his printed itinerary. Premium economy, aisle seat as requested. Ricardo accepted the documents, the weight of the ticket somehow more significant than the divorce papers had been. This was commitment to his future, not just escape from his past. "Will you be checking luggage?" she asked. "Just 2 suitcases," Ricardo replied. He'd already donated most of his possessions, keeping only what held real meaning or practical use. "And your accommodation in Lisbon?" "The Altis Belém Hotel for the first 2 weeks. After that, I have appointments to view long-term options." The agent smiled. "Portugal is beautiful. Many Brazilians are making that move these days." "New horizons," Ricardo said, surprising himself with the genuine optimism in his voice. Outside the travel agency, Ricardo checked his watch. He had appointments with a shipping company and the consulate, then dinner with Paulo, a small farewell to one of the few connections he'd miss. His phone buzzed with a text message. He expected Carlos with another document update, but the name on the screen stopped him cold. Mariana. "We need to talk. It's important. Please call me." Ricardo stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the delete button. Then another message arrived. "I know about the lottery, Ricardo. All of it. Call me, or I call my lawyer." His heart hammered against his ribs. How could she know? Had someone at the bank leaked information? Had Carlos betrayed him? The carefully constructed exit plan suddenly seemed fragile. One phone call from Mariana to her lawyer could potentially freeze everything: the accounts, the transfer, even his ability to leave the country. Ricardo clutched the one-way ticket, his future suddenly as uncertain as the day she'd asked for divorce. He had 5 days until departure, and now a decision to make about a call he'd never expected to receive. Ricardo moved through Guarulhos International Airport with practiced efficiency, rolling carry-on trailing behind him. Despite handling countless business trips over the years, this journey felt fundamentally different, a one-way passage to a new life. At the check-in counter, he presented his passport and ticket with steady hands. "Destination Lisbon?" the attendant confirmed, tapping her keyboard. "Any checked baggage today, Mr. Mendez?" "2 suitcases," he replied, lifting them onto the scale. She attached destination tags. "Any return date planned?" "No," Ricardo said, the simplicity of the word carrying the weight of his decision. As she processed his boarding pass, Ricardo scanned the terminal. Since Mariana's text about the lottery, he'd been vigilant for signs of surveillance. Carlos had assured him the message was likely a bluff. Mariana had no concrete evidence, just suspicions and perhaps gossip from banking circles. Still, every official interaction carried risk. "Your bags are checked through to Lisbon. Boarding begins at 9:30 p.m. at Gate 36. Ricardo moved toward security, joining the line of travelers. Each step forward was another step away from his old life. When instructed, he removed his watch and emptied his pockets, placing them in the plastic bin alongside his laptop. The security officer waved him through the scanner. "Sir, we need to check your carry-on." Ricardo's pulse quickened as a second officer unzipped his bag. The officer methodically inspected its contents, paying particular attention to the documents folder containing his Portuguese banking information. "Business or pleasure travel?" the officer asked casually. "A bit of both," Ricardo answered, maintaining his composed expression. "Exploring opportunities in Portugal." The officer nodded, re-zipped the bag, and handed it back. "Have a good flight." The remaining hours passed in hyper-awareness. Ricardo chose a cafe with a clear view of the terminal entrance, nursing an espresso while watching arriving passengers. No sign of Mariana or her lawyer. At boarding time, he joined the queue, passport and boarding pass ready. Each announcement in Portuguese felt like practice for his new home. When his row was called, He moved forward without looking back. Only after crossing the threshold onto the aircraft did Ricardo allow himself a deep breath. As he settled into his seat, the weight of Brazil began lifting from his shoulders. In 12 hours, he would step into the light of a different sun. Mariana slammed her car door and rushed toward Ricardo's apartment building, phone pressed to her ear. "He's not answering," she snapped at Roberto, who was on the other end of the call. "I'm at his place now." "Calm down," Roberto said, his voice carrying the disinterested tone that had become increasingly familiar. "It's probably nothing." "It's not nothing." She fumbled with her old keys. "My friend at Banco Nacional confirmed he's been moving large sums offshore. And now I find out he won the lottery right before I asked for the divorce? That's just gossip, Mariana. Besides, even if it's true, what can you do now? The divorce is final." She finally located the right key, but discovered the locks had been changed. Cursing, she buzzed the doorman. "Carlos, it's Mariana Mendez. I need to get into apartment 1103. The doorman's voice crackled through the intercom. "I'm sorry, senora, but Mr. Mendez left specific instructions. You're not on his approved visitors list." "Left? What do you mean, left?" "He departed this morning with his luggage. Said he was traveling." Mariana pressed her forehead against the building's cold glass entrance. "Did he say where or for how long?" "No, senora, but he arranged for a service to donate his remaining furniture next week." She ended the intercom call and dialed her lawyer with trembling fingers. "Dr. Carvalho, I need emergency action. Ricardo's won the lottery and hidden the money. He's fleeing the country." "Slow down, Mrs. Mendez. When did he win this lottery?" "The day I asked for divorce. He never disclosed it." A long pause followed. "The divorce is already final. If he acquired the asset before separation, but after you initiated proceedings, it's legally complicated. Do you have proof?" "Not exactly, but without documentation, we have nothing to file." "And if he's already left the country?" Mariana ended the call and dialed Ricardo again, reaching voicemail for the 20th time. As she stared at the building that had once been her home, Roberto called back. "Listen, about dinner tonight. Something's come up at the office." Her world was collapsing from all sides. "Roberto, I need you right now. This is important." "So is this board meeting. Besides, Mariana, we should talk about expectations. I never promised anything permanent." The call ended with a quiet click, leaving Mariana alone on the sidewalk, staring up at an empty apartment that contained neither the husband she'd discarded nor the fortune she'd just discovered. Lisbon greeted Ricardo with golden light that spilled across terracotta rooftops and illuminated pastel-colored buildings. The taxi from the airport wound through narrow streets that opened suddenly to breathtaking views of the Tagus River. "First time in Portugal?" the driver asked in Portuguese, noting Ricardo's appreciative gaze. "Yes," Ricardo replied in the same language, "though it feels somehow familiar. Many Brazilians say that. Same tongue, different rhythm." The driver gestured toward the sunlit waterfront. "That's Belém ahead. Your hotel is near the monument to the discoveries." The Altis Belém Hotel stood gleaming beside the water, its modern architecture contrasting with the historical surroundings. After checking in, Ricardo stepped onto his balcony, breathing in salt air that carried none of the weight of São Paulo's smog or memories. Later, refreshed and changed, he ventured onto the waterfront promenade. Elderly men played cards at stone tables, while children chased pigeons. A street musician played fado, the Portuguese blues, his weathered face telling stories without words. Ricardo stopped at a cafe facing the water and ordered coffee. "American?" the waiter asked in English. "Brazilian," Ricardo corrected. "But living here now." "Ah, bem-vindo." The waiter switched to Portuguese. "Many come for a new start. Portugal is good for that. Old enough to have wisdom, young enough to welcome change." As Ricardo sipped his coffee, his phone vibrated with an email from Carlos. He hesitated before opening it, reluctant to reconnect with Brazil so soon. The message was brief. "All secure. Mariana attempted legal inquiry, but has no standing. Also, heard through channels that Roberto ended their relationship and she's been removed from her position. Clean break achieved. Enjoy your fresh start." Ricardo closed the email without replying. The news stirred no satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet acknowledgement that one chapter had fully closed. He returned his attention to the golden Portuguese light playing across the water, illuminating not what he had escaped, but what awaited him. The morning ritual had become Ricardo's anchor in his new life. Coffee on the terrace of his Cascais apartment, watching fishermen return with their catches as the sun climbed over the Atlantic. Today marked 6 months since his arrival in Portugal, half a year of rebuilding. "Bom dia, Senor Mendes," called Miguel, the elderly caretaker who tended the building's gardens. "Another beautiful morning." "Bom dia," Ricardo replied, his Portuguese now comfortable with local inflections. "The roses are exceptional this week." Miguel beamed with pride. "Wait until next month when the yellow ones bloom. They'll match your Brazilian spirit." Ricardo smiled, appreciating how his nationality had become simply a pleasant aspect of his identity rather than a reminder of what he'd left behind. His neighbors knew him as the Brazilian entrepreneur who'd started a modest consulting business connecting Portuguese companies with South American markets. After breakfast, Ricardo walked the coastal path to his small office overlooking the marina. The space was intentionally modest, his wealth carefully channeled into investments and a charitable foundation rather than ostentatious displays. "There's fresh pastéis de nata," announced Sofia, the local university student who worked as his part-time assistant. "And Senor Oliveira confirmed your meeting about the sustainable fishing project." Ricardo reviewed his calendar while enjoying the custard tart. His days had found a purposeful rhythm. Business in the mornings, Portuguese language classes at lunch, community involvement in the afternoons. Today, he would finalize funding for a local fishing cooperative, a project that resonated with his newfound appreciation for sustainable community growth. "Also," Sophia added, "your landlady invited you to her daughter's wedding next month. She said, and I quote, 'Tell that charming Brazilian he's family now, not just a tenant.'" The invitation touched Ricardo unexpectedly. In São Paulo, social connections had often felt transactional, especially in his final years with Mariana. Here, relationships formed organically based on genuine interactions rather than status or advantage. As he walked to his meeting, Ricardo passed the cafe where he frequently enjoyed lunch. The owner waved, calling out, "Your usual table will be ready at 1. Such small recognitions had gradually woven him into the fabric of local life. His phone buzzed with a message from Paulo back in Brazil, the only connection he'd maintained from his previous life. With a mixture of curiosity and detachment, Ricardo opened it, wondering what news it might bring from a world that felt increasingly distant. Ricardo sat at his favorite cafe table, the afternoon sun warming the cobblestones as he read Paulo's message. "Thought you should know, Mariana's situation has deteriorated. Roberto not only ended their relationship, but had her transferred to a regional office. The company gossip is that her behavior became erratic after discovering your lottery win too late. She's been trying to rebuild her reputation, but it's an uphill battle. Ricardo set down his phone, surprised by his own reaction. The news should have brought satisfaction, poetic justice for her betrayal. Instead, he felt a complex blend of emotions that included an unexpected strand of compassion. His video call with Paulo was scheduled for 15 minutes later. When Paulo's face appeared on the screen, the contrast between their environments was striking. Paulo in a fluorescent-lit office cubicle, Ricardo against a backdrop of blue Portuguese sky. "You're looking well," Paulo observed. "Portugal agrees with you." "It does," Ricardo acknowledged. "How are things in Sao Paulo?" "Same chaos, different day." Paulo leaned closer to the camera. "Did you get my message about Mariana?" "I did. How reliable is this information?" "Very. Elena from HR handled her transfer paperwork. Roberto's nephew got her directorship just as expected. She apparently had a public confrontation with Roberto when she realized there was never a future there." Ricardo nodded, absorbing this without comment. "Aren't you going to say anything?" Paulo pressed. "After what she did to you, this must feel like vindication." Ricardo considered his response carefully. "It feels distant, like hearing about a character in a book I read long ago." Paulo studied him. "You've changed." The old Ricardo would have appreciated the karma. "Perhaps that's true," Ricardo admitted. "But what would that appreciation give me that I don't already have here?" After they disconnected, Ricardo remained at the cafe, watching boats in the harbor. Mariana's downfall had happened without his intervention, natural consequences of her own choices. The knowledge brought neither joy nor regret, just a quiet acknowledgement that justice sometimes unfolds on its own. 1 year to the day after his arrival in Portugal, Ricardo stood at Cabo da Roca, the westernmost point of continental Europe. Beside him, Helena Ferreira, the expatriate consultant who'd guided his relocation and had gradually become a friend, gazed out at the endless Atlantic horizon. "They used to think this was the edge of the world," she said, the wind catching her words. "Now we know it's just another beginning." The symbolism wasn't lost on Ricardo. A year ago, his life had seemed to reach an edge, only to reveal new possibilities beyond. "When you first contacted me," Helena continued, "you were escaping something. Now it seems you've found something instead." Ricardo nodded. "I came here with 12 million reais and thought that was my fortune. I was wrong." "How so?" she asked. He gestured toward the coastline stretching in both directions. "Money bought the ticket, but it couldn't buy this peace." The real wealth turned out to be freedom, not just financial freedom, but freedom from bitterness, from the need for revenge. "Have you ever regretted not confronting her? Your ex-wife?" Helena had heard pieces of his story over the months. Ricardo considered this. What would it have accomplished? To reveal the lottery win just to see her reaction? To fight for money I didn't need at the cost of my dignity? He shook his head. Some victories aren't worth the battle. They walked along the cliffside path as the setting sun painted the ocean gold, the same gold that had named Brazil centuries ago, Ricardo reflected ironically. "I heard from an old colleague today," he said. "My ex-wife's life has unraveled in many ways. Once, I might have found satisfaction in that. And now? Now I hope she finds her way, just as I found mine." He smiled at Helena's surprised expression. "Not because I've forgiven exactly, but because carrying resentment would only diminish this." He gestured to the magnificent view, to the life he'd built. As they turned back toward the parking area, Ricardo felt the weight of the past year, the betrayal, the secret planning, the escape, finally lift completely. The fortune that mattered had never been the lottery win, but the discovery that dignity and peace were riches no deception could diminish. The evening light in Lisbon had a quality Ricardo had never found elsewhere, golden yet gentle, illuminating without harsh exposure. From his balcony overlooking the city's terracotta rooftops and the distant Tagus River, he watched as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward Brazil. 2 years had passed since that pivotal day when betrayal and fortune had arrived simultaneously. The lottery ticket that had seemed so miraculous then now felt like merely the vehicle that had delivered him to this deeper wealth, peace. Life's true fortunes, Ricardo had discovered, were rarely measured in currency. They resided in the dignity preserved when refusing to let bitterness dictate actions, in the quiet satisfaction of facing betrayal not with vengeance, but with strategic self-respect, in the freedom that comes from walking away whole rather than clinging to a broken past. The Portuguese called it saudade, a bittersweet nostalgia that acknowledged loss without being consumed by it. Ricardo felt this now, not for Mariana or the marriage they'd had, but for the man he'd been before understanding these truths. He hadn't rejected his past, he'd integrated it. Each decision, each painful revelation had been necessary stones in the path that led to this moment of clarity. Below, church bells rang as neighbors greeted each other in evening rituals that had existed for centuries. Ricardo had found community here, authentic connections based on who he was becoming rather than what he possessed. As twilight deepened over Lisbon, Ricardo understood the paradox at last. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in what you gain, but in what you refuse to lose: your dignity, your peace, your capacity for joy. These were the fortunes no betrayal could diminish, no deception steal away.